An entitled neighbor causes over $100,000 worth of damage to my niece's house, leaving my niece's home practically in ruins. And at this point, we seriously do not know what to do. Here's what happened. So my niece has a next door neighbor who we will call Louis for the sake of the story, and they are your typical entitled jerk. He's just a very unpleasant guy who will complain about minor infractions, such as cutting your grass and getting lawn clippings on his driveway. But also, he won't hesitate to blow his leaves into her yard when he's cleaning up his yard. Like I said, this guy's a massive jerk. My niece and her little boy went on a 2-week trip to the United Kingdom, and my teenage son house sit for them the first week. And honestly, there were no issues. They were due back on Monday evening, and her ex-husband, who she's still friendly with, stopped by the house to make sure everything was in order, stock her fridge with some essential items, as well as many other things. Well, he was outside and noticed something unusual about a pipe that ran down the outside of the house and emptied into the grass on the side of the house. The AC in their house has a kind of weird setup where there's an outside unit, but also something up on the 3rd floor, and this is attached to the pipe on the house. The condensation runoff from the AC unit flows out of the pipe and empties into the yard. Well, the jerk next door plugged the pipe so that the runoff wouldn't go onto his driveway, which borders my niece's house. The plug pipe caused all of that runoff to back up and spill into her house. It ruined the carpet on the 3rd floor and then dripped down into the bottom 2 floors and into the basement, where it ruined clothing, furniture, toys, and so much more. And my niece's ex didn't realize this yet when he discovered the plug pipe. While he's examining the pipe, Louis comes out to yell at him for being in his yard. They exchanged some words and Louis got his stupid feelings hurt, so he ended up calling the cops. Now, I should mention that my niece's ex is Indian, so he's this brown man that Louis probably mistakes as Middle Eastern. The cops show up, and fortunately, they realize that Louis is a massive jerk, and they tell him to go back into his house and stop calling the cops on his neighbors for no good reason. And even still at this point, nobody is aware yet of the damage in the house. But when the ex went into the house, he saw the dripping water, realized the extent of the damage, and concluded that the plug pipe caused the destruction. He called the cops back out to see what had happened. And again, the cops were really cool about this. They looked at all the damaged areas, they took pictures, and told my niece's ex to go to the police station in the morning so that they could file a police report, because the tampering on their property was likely criminal, and the amount of damages they have sustained could elevate the charges to a felony. Now, my niece's brother is a lawyer, so he's in touch with the police to work that end of it. And my niece's home insurance agent is a friend of hers. They've already sent out an adjuster to figure out damages, and our greatest hope is that Louis will face criminal charges for what he did, and that my niece's home insurance company will sue him like crazy to try and recoup the damages. Now, I don't know. I've never been through this before, because I don't have a jerk neighbor who thinks they can go onto their neighbor's property and do whatever they want. I think it all will work out for my niece, but it is a tremendous hassle, and it's infuriating because Louis is such a jerk, and she has to walk on eggshells to keep him from having some kind of outburst. But now the gloves are off, and we're going to unleash the most annoying poor neighbor behavior that we can on this guy. And I'm over at her house a lot, so we're talking loud music, barking dogs, and yelling kids. My son is a guitarist with an amp that goes all the way up to 11. It won't even take behavior that is obnoxious or disruptive to the entire neighborhood. But because Louis is such a jerk, he freaks out over anything, so it won't take much time to drive him over the edge. Wow, Louis literally is a piece of garbage. The amount of damage that he probably caused to this house, especially when you consider water damage, is most likely extremely expensive. Like, that is not a joke. That is like some serious damage that's going to take a long time to figure out, and it's going to take a lot of money just to get it all sorted out. The original poster even clarifies that they're pretty sure it's about $100,000 worth of damage to the house. So hopefully this guy gets nailed down for all the damage he did to the house, because his behavior is absolutely unacceptable. If you like Am I the Jerk, you're probably going to love Am I the Genius. Check it out, link down below in the description. Also, go to AmITheJerk.com/submit if you would like to submit your own stories. An entitled jerk tries to tell me how to do my job, despite the fact that he literally has no idea what he's talking about. But after being annoyed for several minutes, regardless of me asking him to go away, I decide to maliciously comply, resulting in him getting humiliated in a way I hope he never forgets ever again. Here's what happened. Okay, so I'm a 34-year-old male, and I had always been doing multimedia for my church for years and years. So stuff like displaying lyrics and creating PowerPoint slides are like second nature to me. I was scheduled to take care of the multimedia this morning, so as usual, I came and created what was needed. I set up all of the lyrics, I set up the Bible verses, and I put together all the slides that was sent from the speaker before I went to the restroom. When I get back, I saw the guy who we will call Nate, who usually plays the bass, but he wasn't on the schedule today, and I saw that he was having a conversation with another person behind the multimedia station. I went back to my station and started pre-displaying everything on the screen to make sure that I can read everything, and I did that before I noticed that Nate is looking at my station. Well, 5 minutes before we start, Nate suddenly asked what I prepared, and I showed him everything. I showed him the lyrics, the Bible verses, the slides, and I did that just to satisfy his curiosity. Now, as a side note, I don't really like Nate for several reasons, and that's because he believes in a lot of conspiracies that people share on social media, and when someone questioned him, he would just argue nonstop. So most of us just try to avoid starting a conversation with him in general, and that includes me. Also, whenever he's scheduled to play the bass, he turns his amp's volume quite high, and it's so much higher than the other instruments that I can actually feel the vibrations every time he plucks his bass, and the multimedia station is at the very back of the room. Needless to say, he is just super obnoxious. Well, apparently his obnoxiousness is at a high rate today because as soon as he saw the slides I prepared, he said that the font is too small. He didn't just say, oh, it might be a bit too small. No, he said it's too small, but I told him it's fine. It's the regular font size we all use week after week, but he literally wouldn't drop it. By this time, the service started, but for some reason, he didn't go to find an empty seat in the audience. Rather, he sat on a stool behind my station, while repeatedly telling me that the font is too small. By this point, I was listening to his font mantra behind me, while also displaying the lyrics for the singers. After a couple of minutes, I asked him if he's planning to sit with the audience, and I kid you not, this is what he said to me. Your font is way too small, you need to increase it. And when he said that, I couldn't believe it. He is so fixated on my slide's font size that he refused to leave me alone until I fulfill his wishes. By this point, even the pastor's wife asked him to please have a seat in the audience, in which he told her that it's better for him to sit there because if he sat in the audience, he wouldn't be able to see anything. And at that point, I had had enough, so I decided to maliciously comply. While still controlling the displayed lyrics, I also edited the slides while he watched, so I was basically multitasking. Mind you, the service has already begun, so I can't actually display the slides just to make sure. I increased the font so big that the slides looked ridiculous. Before, there were only 10 slides, and one slide contained 6 to 7 lines of 2 to 3 Bible verses with a translation section below it. But now, there are about 40 slides with 15 plus lines that contain only words in each of them. I can barely fit the translation part, and each slide could contain only one verse. It looked totally atrocious. After witnessing his destruction, he patted me on the back and gave me a thumbs up, and then he finally went to find an empty seat. I then looked at the pastor's wife, and even she shook her head. Well, during the sermon, it was extremely awkward. The speaker was having a difficult time reading from the screen because he kept pausing after each line. I also have to switch the slides quicker than before because each only consisted of one verse, which interrupted the speaker's pace. After 10 minutes, the speaker gave up and just read from his own Bible, which most audiences just followed suit. I witnessed many audiences pulled up their own Bible app from their phone and just read it from there, including Nate himself. I then texted Nate. I said to him, "Why are you reading from your phone? I thought you wanted the font larger so you could read from the screen." And in response, he just turned at me and glared at me silently. After the service was finished, the speaker approached me and asked if everything is okay, because the slides didn't look like what I usually made. The pastor's wife approached us and was very apologetic and explained everything. Then we looked over for Nate, in which we couldn't find him in the crowd. So I guess he was too embarrassed to admit his monstrosity, or how entitled and weird he was acting at the moment. And I honestly hope I never deal with him in this capacity ever again. Wow, Nate sounds incredibly obnoxious. This guy not only needs to stay in his lane, but also he needs to get out of the way. Like, I don't know about you, but if I'm trying to run the multimedia section of some kind of production, regardless of what it is, if I had some idiot hovering over my shoulder saying, "Oh, you're doing it wrong," I would not only kick him out of my space, but also I would lose my mind on him. Like, nobody's going up to Nate while he's playing the bass and being like, "Oh, your speaker's too loud." Like, that would be super obnoxious and very inappropriate. So hopefully Nate learned his place, and the next time he'll choose to stay away from your station and simply let you do your job. An entitled Karen complains to my company after I forced them to follow the rules of the contract that they signed. Here's what happened. Okay, so I work in the security industry, and I'm not going to say where because I fear that someone might recognize the story. The main contract I work is with the local council, and one of the duties I perform is inspecting public halls after they have been rented for a function. And usually it's just private citizens having birthdays, anniversaries, wedding receptions, or something like that. Most of the time there are no problems, and the worst is maybe the space hasn't been cleaned properly, but that's not a problem for me. I just call the cleaning company the council has a contract with, and they send somebody out hopefully before the place gets used again. The fee comes off the deposit paid for the hall, so it's no skin off of my nose. house. On a good day, these inspections take maybe 10 to 15 minutes. And also, everybody has already left or is about to leave, and I can just do any little jobs that wouldn't be worth calling in the cleaning crew. Now, another thing that should be noted is the terms and conditions to which everyone has agreed to before being allowed to use the halls. It is blatantly stated that they have a maximum of 60 minutes after their allotted time has finished that they need to vacate the premises. After that, they are considered to be trespassing, and the police can be called to remove them. The worst thing about all of this is when the people hiring the space go over time. I get paid by the job, not the hour. So a booking running long means I'm waiting for them to finish while not getting paid. And it's always the same excuse. Oh, we lost track of time, sorry. But funny enough, it always seems to be the people who are well off who run long. They seem to think they can just throw money at the problem and it will just go away. Take this past weekend, for example. The booking was an 18th birthday party, and it was scheduled to finish surprisingly early for a weekend night. I arrived the stipulated 10 minutes before the booking is supposed to be finished, just to find that the cleaning has only just begun. Now, to be clear, doing a good job requires at least 45 minutes, and these people had so much stuff that it took them at least that long to get their personal stuff out of the building, let alone even making a start on the cleaning. Knowing all this, I go in and I speak to the people who hired the hall, that being the parents of the birthday girl. I know from experience they wouldn't be able to get everything done in time, and I politely suggested they focus on clearing out their own belongings so I could just call the cleaners in. But unfortunately, I wouldn't be here if they listened, now would I? Because no, they insisted that everything will be fine. They said they'll get everything clean and just pay whatever extra fee the council will charge them for the extra time. However long it took them to clean, they would pay for the time, regardless of the fact that they are in breach of the contract they agreed to when they signed it. No matter how I explained they would not be able to finish everything, they insisted on using the full hour they weren't really entitled to get everything done. Now, to clarify, they were supposed to have everything packed up and cleaned, and it all had to be out by the end of their booking, meaning that extra hour was going to cost them big. Needless to say, with 15 minutes to go, they have only just finished cleaning out their gear, having stopped for about 10 minutes or so to take group photos in the process. So I tell them they have run out of time. They need to get all their gear out so I can call in the cleaners, as there was still a lot to be done. Now, at the time, they seemed accepting of everything, though the mother made a point of telling me that she would be calling first thing Monday to talk to the bookings team. In retrospect, this was her threatening to go to my manager, even though I myself am not a council employee. They ended up clearing out just before the hour expired, and I was finally able to begin the inspection. Oh, and the real kicker here was that they scheduled the caterers to pick up their gear 45 minutes after the scheduled end of their booking. I had all but forgotten about the issue until this morning when I received a call from the council officer who is the liaison between the council and the company I work for. It turns out the mother was true to her word and had actually filed a complaint about the fact that I forced them to adhere to the conditions that they agreed to. Thankfully, the liaison knows me and my work, and once I explained the situation, he agreed I was simply following council protocol. I have no idea how my boss is going to react, as the company only recently took over the contract and they don't know me as well. But hopefully things work out in my favor, because this lady and her family were incredibly entitled. Yeah, it is super obnoxious when people act like this, especially when you're just trying to enforce the rules and they're gonna sit there and be like, fine, I'll follow the rules, but I'm gonna get you in trouble in the process. So honestly, with all things considered, I really hope you don't get in trouble for this. That would be the dumbest reasoning on planet Earth, and I just think that would reflect really badly on your employer, because quite literally, you were just doing your job, and if anything, the fault falls on this family and definitely not with you. Would I be the jerk if I come back to a restaurant just to complain to a manager about a situation that happened 24 hours prior? Because right now, I feel very sad and very humiliated, and at this point, I seriously don't know what to do. Here's what happened. Okay, so I ate at this supposed Italian restaurant Saturday night, and trust me, you'll understand in a minute why I'm describing it that way, because I wasn't craving typical Italian food, and this was just nearby and I was just kind of hungry. When I got there, I ordered a chicken cordon bleu, and this is a meal I've eaten 100 times on different places, and I know very well how it's supposed to look and taste. Now, I've been to this place before, but more for beverages. I've never really had a meal from them until now. So they give it to me, and I was surprised by the first unfamiliar thing. The chicken was covered with an odd-looking mushroom sauce and onions. It wasn't made properly, and the whole thing just tasted awful. The accompaniment wasn't okay either. The vegetables were not cooked or cleaned properly. The rice came with a cinnamon and dry grape seasoning that not only has nothing to do with the recipe, but only tastes so bad. I was so unsatisfied with the overall dinner, and it wasn't cheap, so I couldn't just let it go. I told the waitress if she could please just change my plate, but she said to me, well, what does changing mean? So I told her I want to exchange it with something else. She then asked me why, and I kindly explained it to her. She then says that they cannot replace a plate unless it has a sour taste. So I tell her that mine is inedible at this point. She then tells me that I should have asked her what they put in it, but I say to her that everybody knows what that specific meal is made of. We exchanged a bit, and she kept interrupting me and refusing to properly listen to me or even hold accountability of her own sayings. I then say, okay, can you please just call your manager? And she says yes. Now I waited for a good while, and she and the cashier were chatting and basically free. And from time to time, they would look at me and just start laughing. Eventually, I got done with it, and I decided to stand up and go to them. Once the girl noticed me, she said to me, I was just going to call him for you and you came by. And she only said that to try and make herself look less guilty for making me wait that long. And the person that she introduced me to was a cashier and not a manager. And I knew for a fact she wasn't about to call anybody. So I said what I had to say to this guy, and he didn't even respond. Meanwhile, another person comes along who I'm assuming was a chef or something like that, and they said to each other, oh, here's the one who will know what to say to her. And I initiated the conversation all over again. And this guy wasn't any more professional. He didn't give any solution or explanation, and instead of responding in a mature way, he attacked the fact that I said the food was bad and tried to guilt trip me into believing it's forbidden to describe food like that. Now, the entire time I was smiling and trying to be professional, but the act of me smiling and saying friendly things to the waitress only made the whole thing worse, since they both took my kindness for a weakness and they just treated me like a fool. I tell him that I didn't lack respect towards him nor the food, and that I simply expressed my lack of satisfaction about this situation, but this guy just kept blabbering. In a nutshell, I basically told him in the end if he had any solution or anything to suggest, but he just said no in a mocking way and then turned his back and returned inside. The whole staff were then staring at me and mocking me after I paid, and I just said out loud, it feels good to know what restaurant I'll never step foot in ever again. After that, I felt so bad about it that I started to cry back home. I didn't deserve this kind of humiliation. Now, I'm someone who is very sensitive, and the vast majority of the words that I should have said didn't come to my mind in the heat of the moment. Now that I'm much less stressed about it, I plan to go there and ask for an apology, but from the actual manager and not from anyone else. They already tried to fool me, and I don't want that to happen again. And of course, I'm never eating there ever again. So would I be the jerk if I did this? And what can I do to feel better about this and less guilty for not responding properly and defending myself? I later checked online if this wasn't just a singular incident, and many comments online confirmed that they had a nightmare dealing with this specific restaurant. What should I do? First of all, I'm so sorry that they treated you that way, but also now's your time to get back at them. For starters, you would not be the jerk for complaining because the way they treated you was completely out of line. Like, that is unacceptable to the highest degree, and I just think it's the right thing for you to do to complain in this scenario. Like, your server didn't do the job right at all. In fact, she didn't even put any effort into doing her job. I mean, any server would happily try to exchange the plate for something else, especially if the customer knows right off the bat that the meal sucks. It would have been nothing for that server to switch that out and be like, oh, I'm so sorry the food sucks, let me get you something else. But instead, she and her coworkers just made fun of you the entire time. That is not fair, and in my opinion, you absolutely should complain, because this kind of humiliating treatment should not go unpunished. My entitled manager tries to force my friend to use all his vacation time as some kind of power play to show how good of a manager he really is. And I've honestly never been more frustrated with anybody in my life. Here's what happened. Okay, so a new manager was hired for our team, and quickly he wanted to impose his way of doing things, namely having daily stand-up meetings, people having lunch at different times, as well as several other unpopular things. So needless to say, he did not start off well with most people in our team. Then he started going after people who had accumulated annual leave. And for reference, in Australia, we get 20 days annual leave per year. Now, I had none left, so it was no problem for me, but this friend of mine had been working there for nearly 8 years and never took a day off, meaning that he had months worth of annual leave. This manager wanted to make an example of him and ordered him to plan out vacations or even to sell back to the company some of that time, which is perfectly legal but with tons of conditions. My friend didn't want to take any time off, but was being pressured constantly by our manager, and this was every day at our stand-up meetings. The first item would always be pending annual leave and would just fixate on my friend. One day, my friend just had enough of this guy and gave him two options. He told him he wanted to go for extended holidays back to his country and he wanted to take it all at once, or he's gonna sell the whole thing back to the company. Well, the manager accepted the first option, only to come back the next day after checking with his manager to say that wasn't possible, as he would have to go for nearly 6 6 months, and we had plenty of projects in the pipeline. He then said he'll have to sell the entire thing back to the company. But then he came back the next day after checking with HR, and one of the conditions says that you can only sell a maximum of 20 days. So this is where his malicious compliance came into play. From that day onwards, every morning my friend started emailing our manager while also sending this to HR and the head of the department, asking him for an update on his annual leave arrangements, stating he had given him the option he was looking for and was waiting for his response. He would also bring it up and push for an answer every day at our stand-up meetings. And while he never got a reply from our manager, weeks later he did get a reply from the head of our department, indicating that they will review other options and let him know, but they never did. Well, the following year, my friend had his first daughter and ended up taking an extended leave for about 3 months. Also, the pushy manager eventually resigned as he never felt comfortable in the team and found another job somewhere else. And honestly, all I can say is good riddance, because that guy was an absolute nightmare to deal with. How ignorant and stupid can somebody be where they would not only try to deny somebody's accumulated time off, but also try to shortchange them when they try to sell it back to the company? Like, that is insane. That would make me so frustrated and angry, especially if I worked there. And the way this manager came into this new job is just so annoying. And it's unfortunately something that's pretty typical of new managers. They walk in headstrong and try to change everything, instead of trying to get the pulse of the room and figure out, okay, what really does need to be changed. Like, this guy was trying to make an example out of somebody, but he's the one that ended up quitting at the end of the day. So it kind of makes sense why he didn't feel comfortable with the team. He literally made himself a villain right off the bat. So good for your friend for stepping up and not taking any of this guy's garbage, because the way he was acting was completely unacceptable. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. To finish listening to all the stories, check out the playlist at the top of the description. And if you want some chill music to put on in the background, check out easymode.com. If you like Am I the Jerk, subscribe to Am I the Genius. Everything will be linked down below in the description.